It sounds pretty loud up here. So, welcome to our continuing discussion on UFOs. I hope that you were able to attend this morning the session that Dr. Francesca gave us on UFOs. It was very interesting, I think, and that's what we're here to discuss some more of this afternoon. And while we're on that topic, I got to thinking about the 3 different kinds of aliens that she described. And I was wondering if you could order any, because I'd really like to order the Nordic kind, if that's possible. Okay. Can you put in a word for me somewhere? Okay. Good. All right, so we're going to start this off today by introducing the panel members. Once again, I am Sandy Bashirs, the moderator, and we will be opening the audience questions in just a little bit after we have the panel discussion. So welcome. If you're having trouble seeing the panel, feel free to scoot your chair around a little bit so that you can see through people. Okay.
My name is Fran Barr. I teach in the English department at North Idaho College.
My name is Larry Broadbent. I'm a retired law enforcement officer in Cooney County.
My name is Phyllis Klein, and I am a sophomore student here at NIC.
Hi, I'm Gail Snipes. I'm a resident of Idaho for a long time, a mother, a grandmother of 17, and I've been around a lot and seen some interesting things.
My name is Trin Vo, and I'm the Associate Student Body Vice President.
I'm Duke Snyder, anthropology instructor at North Idaho College.
I was the speaker this morning, Aleuti Francesca, director of the Solar Light Retreat in Southern Oregon.
Okay, I know many of the panel members were asked to be on this panel because they themselves have experienced some kind of an unusual phenomena in their life before. And so I'm going to start out by inviting the panel members to share an experience they've had before with the UFO.
Well, I guess I will begin. Let me say that I have always been pretty much a skeptic for these kind of phenomenon, but I have had an experience in my life which did not fit into the normal pattern of life as I was led to believe it should be. I was about 21 years old. I was in college. My brother and I had to travel about 20 miles to school. We lived on a farm, so we had to travel about 20 miles to school and then 20 miles home. We were both taking night classes at the time, and we're coming home around 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Now, in this part of southern Colorado, it's farming country, so everything is set off in mile sections, 1 mile sections. And the highway ran west, and then it turned into a north-south highway. If you continued west, you would go onto a dirt road, which would run up to another mile section, and then it would turn, and then it turned left or north and south again. We were getting ready to turn, let's see, I guess it would have been south to go home on the highway, when my brother said, "Hey, what's that up there out in the fields?" Because as you continued on the dirt road, it was fields of potatoes and various other kinds of things. So I said, well, let's go see. The closer we got, the more interesting it became. What seemed to be happening is it was a bright, starry night, lots of moonlight, and there was a very large object above a power line that was about the size of a large tree, maybe a very large old maple tree, and it was blocking out the light. And from this dark object, there were lights that seemed to be coming up and down to the power lines. And I can't, of course it's been 20 years ago, so some of these details are a little foggy now, but it seemed to me there were 3, maybe 4 lights that it seemed like they were coming up and down to the power lines in kind of a random fashion. And they were colored. I can't remember exactly the colors, but like one would be red and one would be green and one would be white, something like that. Well, my brother pulled up, oh, maybe as far as from here to the end of this room, and we stopped the car and rolled down the window. And we could hear a sound as though an engine were running. I don't know if I can be more specific than that. It didn't sound quite like what you had a tape of. It sounded more like an engine, to tell you the truth. At that point I said, hey, let's drive up closer. I wanted to see what it was, and I didn't feel any fright whatsoever. But my brother said, you can forget it. And about that time, it started to lift up and move toward the car. Well, you can imagine how fast my brother's foot hit the accelerator. And we headed east at a rather fast speed. And it followed us for a little bit, and then pulled up and went over and appeared to land in another field. Well, we were both kind of rattled by that point and went on home. Interestingly enough, my brother, see, I said, I don't know what it was, but it was, I would call it an unidentified flying object. Who knows what it was? My brother claimed that the next night when he was riding his motorcycle into town that the same object followed him for a certain distance. During that week, there were reported sightings all over the area. We lived in the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado. And there were also some animal mutilations up against the Crestone Needles, there were some sand dunes that had formed up against some very high kind of peaky mountains called the Crestone Needles. And there were animal mutilations up in that area. Lots of interest, lots of people reporting sightings. It was nothing that I could really explain, and I still can't explain. But it certainly didn't fit into my idea of what the world was like. Since then, I've just sort of put it on the back burner and forgotten it. And it's, I guess, one of those things you file in your little box called anomalies in my life that I can't explain. And I've just pretty much forgotten it. But it is an experience that has not been repeated. I have not seen anything similar to that again. And as I said, I prefer to call it an unidentified flying object. I don't know what it was, and I don't know if I ever will. Thanks.
Did you have any missing time?
Well, I guess I'm maybe one of the panelists that haven't experienced any kind of close encounters, but through my field in law enforcement, I have conducted several investigations, particularly in occult activity, cattle mutilations, and so on. And although there was many theories offered during the times that I did this, some through UFOs from different kinds of sharp-jawed beetles, all those kind of things for the cattle mutilations. So I've myself have not had any direct dealings with, or any encounters with UFOs per se. As I said, although we have taken a lot of reports, it appears that most of the general public will report those kind of phenomena to their nearest local law enforcement agency and so on. So over the period of time, I know that we have collected, I say collected, but there have been numerous sightings, reports offered throughout the state of Idaho where I work. With that, I also have to believe that in our universe that there is got to be other extraterrestrial intelligent life forms. I can't always believe that we're the only ones in the entire universe. So with that, I know that we must have other life forms that are out there. Whether they have contacted us or not, I guess I'm still the skeptic in that sense, but I'm not a disbeliever in other extraterrestrial life forms.
I'd like to respond to the cattle mutilation since that's come up twice now. The cattle mutilations most likely are attributable to the Greys. Since they're doing experimentation on humans, they certainly haven't stopped at doing experimentation on cattle. The precision of the surgical removal of sex organs, eyes, brain, has been stated to be so exact that nothing that we know of on Earth could actually perform this surgery, because there was no blood, and yet organs had been totally removed. So most likely we can attribute the cattle mutilations to the Greys, or the negative space intelligences, not the space commands of the Confederations. Thank you.
I'm standing up because I have something to show you. I'd first like to say that I worked for many years as a management consultant to some pretty big companies, including GTE, where I worked with management people to teach them how to get along with employees in a positive manner. So, and I've had some college education. This doesn't really relate to that, except I'm just not a backwoods lady, is all I want to get across. I've had two experiences. One I have hesitated to talk about because it was so outrageous, and I'm going to start with that one. When we moved to Idaho, I have 6 children, and I found that I could drive the bus to school and back, and then work a regular job, and then I knew where my kids were all the time. On one case, I was driving up a backwoods road, and I had let the last of the children off. It was during the middle of winter, and I drove back down. It was dark, and my home at that time was probably 3 miles from the end of the bus line. And I went by this particularly dark stretch, and I had the most horrible feeling of something standing directly behind me in the bus while it was moving. The hair on the back of my neck prickled up, and and then when I got home, my husband said, "Why are you a half hour late? What happened?" And I didn't know, because I didn't think I was a half hour late. That was one. This was something I can't prove. It just was a weird thing. Something else happened. This was in spring of '75. I was driving the school bus into town, and for those of you that are familiar with Sandpoint, this is the tracks. You can see where the red, that's the object that represents the bus. The red line is the line of sight where we saw this object. I had stopped at the railroad tracks, as you have to do when you have a bus, and we saw this light in the sky, and at first I thought it was just an airplane. When I came to a stop, the bus, and opened the doors, I pointed it out to the children. Now there were about 60 children, junior high and senior high school ages, and they all saw it, and they were just amazed. What is that? And there was a hubbub in the bus. People in cars were parking along the side of the road and getting out to look at this. On this side, I have a Mickey Mouse rendition because I'm not a very good artist. And it was a dark, cloudy day, although the clouds were high, so we had good visibility. And the object seemed to appear in front of the mountains at the Syringa Point area. It was a large black band with 3 intense white strobe lights. It seemed to be very, very intense lights. As I held my hand, sitting in the bus, I held my hand out like this, and it appeared to be 4 to 6 inches long. Now that's a distance of about 6 miles. As we continued on into town, I let students off at 3 different schools. Then I drove into the high school, into the bus shop, and I called the other drivers out. This was still hanging there in the sky. It was not moving. When we first saw it, it was above the mountain line, and then it dropped down so that it was in front of the mountains. Probably 10 drivers came out, and they looked, and we were all talking about it. Everyone was all excited about it. So I went in and I called the local airport, and I said, what is this? It's really weird. And they said, we have no record of anything being there. In addition, if something was there, they would have to clear with our airspace before they could legally fly there. They said the Army would have the right to fly there without notifying us, but they have always notified us in the past out of courtesy. So we have no idea what this is. I talked to a gentleman who was a retired Air Force pilot, and he said if it appeared to be 4 to 6 inches at arm length, considering by looking at the map that it was approximately 6 miles away, he said it would have to be the size of 2 747s, so this wasn't a very little object. I then called the newspaper who had not seen it, and they immediately set crews out, but they weren't unable to get a picture of it. I called the sheriff's office, and they said we have about 100 reports of this, but we don't know what it is. We can't give you any answers. I have over here in the audience is Carolyn Abbott. She was a student on the bus at the time, and she saw it as well. And it was a pretty interesting experience. Again, I don't know what it was. I just know that it was something pretty unusual, and it sure changed my concept of, saying no, these things don't exist. And if anybody wants to look at this after the meeting, you're welcome to come up and look at the chart. Thank you.
I have no confessions to make.
Okay, one of the most interesting notions that Dr. Francesca presented this morning, I think, was the idea of a cosmic Watergate. And I was real interested in that because I, like probably many of you, have always assumed that the Air Force was out there doing their job, gathering information for us and investigating all of these things. And so I would like to open this to the panel and or the audience. Any questions or comments that you may have on what Dr. Francesca described as a cosmic Watergate. She gave lots of evidence that this is indeed occurring. So. Yes.
Dr. Francesca, I'd like to ask you, you spoke about this radio broadcast in southern England in '77. How could it be suppressed when so many people heard it over the radio? Why wouldn't that generate publicity and articles and so forth?
Did everybody hear the question? Okay. The question was, how could the radio broadcast in England that was 5.5 minutes long that Dr. Francesca described this morning, how could that have been suppressed when so many people knew about it?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Millions of people heard that. And twice in different audiences, 2 people have stood up and said, I was there when that happened and I heard it. One of those people has since become my friend. The media simply chose to regard it as a hoax. And the media, by and large, whether you like to believe it or not, is controlled from above. That's my only answer to that, because it seemed to me at the time when I first saw the little 1 paragraph about it in the Seattle newspaper, which didn't give any idea of the degree of 5.5 minutes of time and what was said, and it was just very misleading. It said millions of people heard it, most of them were frightened, and something else to that effect. So obviously there is, and I did not coin the phrase, I would like to take credit for it, but it was Dr. Stanton Friedman who used the term cosmic Watergate, and I find it so applicable I tend to use it. Yes?
I have a 3-hour video of a Bill Cooper lecture in Sedona, Arizona. As to the date, I don't know. But in that, Bill Cooper says that there is a communication umbrella put over that area, so any telecast coming out of that area is not going out to the general public and the rest of the United States. Now, this only could be done by the government. I don't know of any other source that could put that kind of a blanket over communication. The tape I have was about 4th hand come out of that area.
Oh, may I ask what area he's talking about?
Sedona, Arizona.
Oh,
That's where the lecture was. Now, the area, like around Las Vegas, I understand that there is a gentleman down there that broadcasts routinely on a question and answer type program discussing things like this, but you never hear it up here.
Okay, could I comment on that? Bill Cooper, or William Cooper, is a retired naval man who gave a lot of information. He has a new book out called Behold a Pale Horse. He is a very controversial figure in the UFO field. He has stated that there is indeed a massive, massive cover-up by the government going on, similar to the Kennedy assassination. And indeed he states, now realize I'm quoting what he is saying, I cannot validate it and I don't invalidate it. He is stating that the Kennedy assassination was even tied in and that Kennedy was about to break governmental silence and reveal the truth about the coming of the aliens, the secret alien treaty at the time he was assassinated. It's an interesting theory. So if that gentleman is willing to show his video of Bill Cooper, you might want to get in touch with him. The area he's talking about is called Dreamland in Nevada, and it is out from Las Vegas. It is, according to Cooper and John Lear, who's son of the aircraft manufacturer Lear and an ex-CIA man even, which makes him somewhat suspect from some people's point of view, but he and Cooper are both stating that there is a secret alien base under the sands there, a combined base between the United States government treaty people and the Greys.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, some time ago, a gentleman by the name of Rupert came out with a book called the Project Blue Book, and you mentioned that the Air Force isn't really doing anything that they're supposed to. However, in his book, he was a retired officer of that project, and he, even after giving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of explanations for what people see, still managed to come up with a pretty interesting percentage that were totally unexplainable. Do you have any comments on that?
Ruppelt, I think, was a very honest man, and he published his book after he got out from under Project Blue Book. He also, interestingly enough, did not live too very much longer after that. In terms of the fact, I think the man was only in his 30s or 40s. Ruppelt, Dr. James MacDonald, who was stirring up a great deal of interest in the United Nations. Many of these people are no longer with us and have died under what could be termed suspicious circumstances.
Doctor, I'd like to follow up on a little bit more about that 1977 broadcast. A couple of things. One was this message said that they had not heeded our messages, which basically about the atomic energy that we've been using. So I'm assuming that there were prior messages to this broadcast or some prior warnings as such. And then I also get the feeling that there was some veiled threats in a message directed towards Earth in some sense.
No, I wouldn't interpret them as threats, warnings that we were in dire danger ourselves, but not threats from them. What was the first part of your question about the
previous messages?
The fact that Eisenhower and the government were contacted at that time, as I said, by the Space Confederations of Light, warning them to dismantle nuclear technology and not to have dealings with the three craft that were orbiting the equator back in the 50s. That was one original contact. Through another contactee in Southern California, they did state that they had contacted scientists and governmental people and that they simply would not pay attention. Interestingly enough, if you want, and this lady had a question, how can you suppress this kind of thing? Do you know that after Cooper sent copies of his material, after Bill Cooper sent that material to every congressman and senator, he states that he received 2 responses to this. Now that alone is an indication that these people are, as the Space Confederations have said, subject to the approval of voters, to the mass opinion, and they are afraid. They are afraid to stand up and be counted because they won't get re-elected. That's the bottom line.
Yes, sir.
If there was a cover-up in 1977, I mean, if they said it was a hoax, wouldn't there be the kind of scandal around it like in the 38 broadcast of War of the Worlds?
No, because they couldn't prove that students with 80 pounds worth of equipment had sneaked up on the Hannington mast, as they stated, because they never caught anybody. This was simply their theory. But when it was investigated and found that it wasn't monitored under normal circumstances, the test insertion signals weren't functioning, the engineers did not hear the space message, so they couldn't stop it coming through, then it was obvious that it was not coming through by means of Earth electricity.
Well, if they tried to cover up as a hoax, why wouldn't there be the media circus like there usually is with something like that?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I suggest you all think about it. The point is that it did not get out to the world other than a few paragraphs, and you can check the Seattle papers around that time of, it was November 27th, I think, 1977, in southern England on Southern ITV.
To answer
Right
that
here.
question,
Could you speak loudly so everybody could
to
hear?
answer that question, all you'd have to do is ask any vet from the Vietnam era who served in Vietnam about how cover-up. It's not only possible that it's absolutely happened through the entire war.
Thank you.
The American public have absolutely no idea what happened over there because it was totally covered up. Another instance that I'll give you is 6 years ago we had a United States Senator propose to the Congress. This was on national TV. I sat there and watched it. Indicating that the Congress be put to a vote to enforce the law that organized crime could not have any business interest, that they could be confiscated. And under our laws, they cannot, and they can be confiscated, that the mafia's properties be confiscated. Nothing was said after that media translate on TV after that was done. He disappeared, and nothing was ever done about it. The mafia is known for owning many of our major corporations in this country. And this happened. And it was right on TV. And yet he disappeared and there was never anything said about it again.
Thank you.
You're saying there's lots of cover-ups that we
Well,
don't.
sure there is.
This gentleman, next. We need
Doctor,
to everybody.
with your connection with the UFO phenomenon, have you had any experiences with MIBs?
The question was, have I had any experiences with MIBs? MIBs meaning the men in black. Yeah, actually I did. It's not something I normally talk about publicly, but a man who was certainly dressed in all dark clothing, dark glasses, did contact me when I was still married to my ex-husband and living in Santa Barbara. He did some very strange things, He came and he went, and he appeared later in Chicago doing strange things there, and he appeared in New York. And at the time he was with us, he was smoking continually, and I'm normally allergic to ordinary cigarette smoke. I asked him not to, and he said that he had to in order to acclimate himself to the Earth's atmosphere. I found that after he left, I was coughing as if I had TB, and I was coughing for weeks with this silly little TB-sounding cough, and I was getting weaker and weaker. And I went to a spiritual healer after I'd been to my chiropractor. My chiropractor did a radionics check and said, put it in his terminology, you've got a boot full of something, but it's an unknown. I can't locate it on my radionics equipment. And I went then, well, I didn't go. A spiritual healer, a friend of mine, came through town, called me up and said, something's the matter. He said, I feel something's wrong with your chest. I said, it certainly is. He said, well, I think I can help you, and he did indeed. He gave me what we term in metaphysics spiritual healing, and the condition, which was weeks long at that point, left. This being was very strange. He was humanoid, but he had a Russian Polish sounding accent. He had dark ivory whites to his eyes, more like an East Indian. None of him matched up. So that, I imagine, we could term my experience with a man in black.
So you're suggesting that MIBs are extraterrestrials and not terrestrials?
I am not sure. I only know that he stated before he came up, when he called from another researcher's place in Los Angeles, that he would appear over our home in Montecito, just near south of Santa Barbara. at a specific time. And my husband and another couple who were working with our group at that time were coming up. Well, I knew they wouldn't be there at that time, so I changed the time. Also, I changed it so I had some control over the situation and I wasn't subject to anything that could be termed hypnotic suggestion. I changed the time by an hour, and at that time a UFO did appear over Santa Barbara, was seen by all four of us, and was reported in the Santa Barbara news press as going back and forth over the foothills. I also sent out to it mentally, "Are you," and I mentioned the name he'd given me, which was again a very strange name. "If so, will you bring the craft towards me?" And the craft did indeed come towards us. So, it was a very strange experience.
Over here, questions over here? Any over on this side? I don't want to miss it. Yes?
It always tickles me. You talk about the Watergate like cover-up and stuff, but you know, in my experience, I've always cracked up every time somebody brings something up like that. With as many movies as we got out, like E.T. and Star Trek, and all these movies where they can make you think you're seeing something you're not, and they can even do it to people on the street. They do it for promos and stuff. I think if an extraterrestrial were to walk up to me and say, "Hi, I'm from another planet," I'd say, "Yeah, right," and turn around and walk off.
Well, unfortunately,
we're becoming so conditioned to be so numb toward that. I think if the government were to actually say, "Yeah, we've got a UFO in our hangar," and took pictures and put it in the press, half the people wouldn't believe it.
you're probably right. The American public's had a long history of being conned. And there is so much promotional material that really is very dishonest. You know, people are extremely cynical at this time. I agree with you.
Right back here.
Did I understand you that UFOs had supposedly landed at Edwards Air Force Base?
According to many reports, even before I left England in '54, that rumor had leaked over there. According to Bill Cooper, according to Unsolved Mysteries program, Eisenhower went to Palm Springs supposedly on vacation, was spirited to the dentist suddenly, but went down to Edwards Air Force Base and met with a landed UFO.
My question is, how could, we used to live out there, and even though we were only peripherally associated with the base, we still knew about the supposedly, quote, secret X-15 and the, quote, secret British Faulkner aircraft that they were testing out there at different times. And we saw the X-15 going over, we saw the Faulkner when we were out in the desert. How are you saying that these landed without the people that are peripherally, even just peripherally associated with the base, knowing and not knowing about it, when we knew about these supposedly secret, and we even at one point saw an aircraft that we were not supposed to see because we were out in the desert in an area just outside the base? How can you say that these landed without somebody seeing them that wasn't associated with the military?
Oh, but somebody probably did see it, and as far as the military were concerned, everybody, and you must know, in the military is under wraps, and if they reveal things that they've been told not to, as Colonel Wendell Stevens said, there's loss of pay, there's severe penalties. Also, any craft landing at night are under an invisible force field. It would be very easy to bring down and leave again.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to point out the military now loses their pension if they do anything against the government's wishes, i.e. UFOs. Air Force personnel now lose their pension and anything they've got coming if they bring anything up.
Thank you. That's what Colonel Stevens said, that there are severe penalties.
Yeah, that would be motivation, wouldn't it? Not to tell.
I would like to also talk to the bus driver lady. I can clear up, or I can confirm what she's seeing. I've been seeing it since 1986, and the military was there looking for it up until February of this year.
First of all, I'd like to applaud each of you for being here today and having an open mind or skepticism and not living your life in a little box and being open to other areas that are going on, whether you have realization consciously of it or not. Another thing I would like to point out is If you pay close attention to the sky and things that are going on around you in your physical reality here, you will have signs. There's been a lot going on over Highway 41. There's been a lot of light sightings, a lot of UFO sightings. Recently, about 6 to 8 weeks ago, there was a sighting over the mountain right there behind Rathdrum at the very peak of it. The most brilliant white light that you can imagine at the very top of it. I was told about 11:30 at night to go out to this spot, and I thought, what the hell am I going out here for, you know? And I was called to look over at this area. And I thought, well, how do you get up there? What, is there tree work going on? Is the government doing something? It was none of those things. It was not reported in the newspapers either. But you really have to be aware, not only for UFO things, but other things that are being covered up throughout the government and other areas of your life. Really pay attention and really research things for yourself and listen to what's in your heart. Don't be, put under by other things that are going on, or join the masses and be herded like cattle for what they want you to develop and be and do.
I'm not sure everybody can hear you. Speak louder. My father-in-law was in the military, in the Air Force, for over 28 years, and in the CIA. He told me in now some of his information was declassified. He was top security, so I'm not saying anything that is not declassified now. But they did cover up, and there are evidently still tests going on with regard to ESP. And it's going on in Edwards. And he was stationed in Edwards for many years after he came back from Greece. And he was an ambassador to the junta military takeover, which the United States government was in quite control of at that time. I don't think it's any kind of a secret to anyone that that's what was happening in the 50s. But when he told me this, I always trusted him and believed in him. Intellectually, he was superior. And he said that they are not going to ever, unless it is openly by a lot of people commenting on it, where it's finally found out, they will never admit. And he was also, during this time, in contact with Eisenhower, and he was the head of the B-10 bomber flights, where he did train all of the military to fly, and he was in command as a light colonel. So these kind of evidences I was told about, now things are coming out like this, and the fact that it was shattering to me almost. I wondered why. I heard originally about UFOs and the extraterrestrials that were good. And then all of a sudden I heard and read about a lot of extraterrestrials that were the Greys. Not knowing they were separate, I just thought it was like dismissed in one. And you really clarified a lot.
Thank you, because I feel that's very important, because the Greys are receiving media coverage. And I don't think it's any accident that the Greys are receiving media coverage. I think there is a deliberate plot, plan, whatever you want to call it, to get the people very afraid of ETs and to believe that they are only bent on abduction and harmful actions. Therefore, all that you heard originally about the space commands of light, you are hearing nothing except from people like me.
Yes, ma'am.
In 1953, you said that the Greys made face-to-face contact with the federal government, whatever, signed some kind of treaty. We can't hear you. Oh, okay. In 1953, I believe it was, you said that the government, they made face-to-face contact with all government, I believe you said, and signed a treaty to do experimentation. I don't remember if you said why it was necessary for them to sign a treaty with our government.
Question was, why was it necessary for the United States government to sign this secret treaty with the Greys? Is that correct?
Yeah, why was it necessary for the extraterrestrials to...
Because apparently they wanted to establish some kind of diplomatic relations originally. They wanted to do experimentation. The United States government, which at that time it seems to me was incredibly naive, thought that they were going to get advanced technology. And remember, the Cold War was going on at that time. Therefore, they felt it was in the national interest to get this advanced technology, so if a war with Soviet Russia took place, they could wipe them out of existence. This is probably the reason that the treaty was established. As far as the Greys were concerned, they were very duplicitous, and I think they had whatever motives they had in mind involved the cattle mutilations and the experimentation and abduction of humans, and they wanted to do it perhaps as easily and as possible at that time. Not that they couldn't come in and still couldn't come in, except that they knew that if they did come in with force, the space confederations which monitor this section of space in the solar system would throw them out. So they had other things to deal with beside the Eisenhower administration.
That made me think of a question I had this morning as you were talking about the Greys signing this treaty so that they could abduct people for scientific research. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that these abductions had happened all over the world. So does that suggest that there were other treaties?
That's a good question. Were there other treaties? I don't know. I only know what Cooper is saying that has happened here. However, at the conference in Crete, where people came from Germany, where people came from several countries, England, Germany, Canada, as well as the United States, the conference I was on there in October, we did find out that the main amount of abductions and these terrifying stories of physical examinations and medical removal of ova and sperm was in the main taking place in the United States. It was not taking place to anything like this degree in Europe, or as far as we could determine, other countries. So that brought up an interesting question. Why did it happen? Why is it happening to such a degree in the United States? You might think about that, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about it since that conference.
Argentina and Brazil have had cattle mutilations.
Yeah, I didn't say there hadn't been any others. I said the main amount of the human abductions are taking place in the United States.
Right here.
Yeah, I have a question about, I missed the first 15 minutes of your speech in the auditorium, so I don't know if you covered this. But just exactly why is the world trying to cover this up? I mean, we're all kind of curious. We'd like to know about what's going on. Why would they, I'm sure there's a lot more than just us. Why would they want to cover this
What
up?
I said at the end of my lecture was, it's your responsibility, particularly in a democracy, to demand that your senators, your congressmen, your president gives you answers as to why it's being covered up. Take the power back. Am I paraphrasing Jerry Brown? Take the power back and start asking the questions you're asking me from the sources that should be giving you answers.
What's your opinion of it?
My opinion is, yeah, they sure as you know what are covering up. And they're covering up because why? Okay, the answer to the $64,000 question is very simple. The Space Confederations of Light originally, in their offer to help if all nuclear stuff was dismantled, had said that they had a source of free or universal energy, free, note that word, free, and that they would make it available to this entire planet. Not to the United States, not to Soviet Russia, but to the entire planet, which would then, if you think it through, outmode all existing power systems, oil, electricity, nuclear energy, natural gas. What do you think that would do? It would topple the entire economic system as it now exists. The powers that be will not allow this to happen. That is why you are having a cosmic Watergate. It's not just this country, it's the powers that be in every country on this planet, and the government that is known as the secret government, which exists behind the scenes, that's running the show on power, energy, and the sources of control that is keeping this under wraps. How many presidents had stated that if they were elected, Jimmy Carter did, I believe Reagan did, Goldwater, who was a presidential candidate, all stated that they had had experiences with UFOs and that they would reveal the truth about them if they were elected. Did they?
No.
Who put the lid on them then?
The monetary elite.
Yes, exactly. That's a good answer, the monetary elite.
Mike suffered his heart attack, his first heart attack, after reviewing the evidence he found at Edwards or wherever it was. He suffered his first heart attack after seeing this. And also, as far as how can the government hide something like this? Well, stealth technology or the cloaking devices, which we've had for many, many, many years, and supposedly we've used for many years. It wasn't even flown out of Edwards Air Force Base. They flew it out of John Wayne, Van Nuys Airport at night. Just another plane going out on the runway and taking off. And they did that for years. And the Greys, another way you think of the Greys is they're a parasite, apparently. And a parasite will attack an organism in a weakened condition. Humanity is certainly in a weakened condition.
Good point. Excellent point. Humanity is in poor condition, and to be honest, as far as I can see, so is the United States at this present point, with the incredible crime rate, the immorality, the abuse of children and women. There is a terrible disease attacking this country and also, to some degree, the entire planet at this time. It is not a healthy organism.
Lack of trust.
You mentioned people being abducted. Could you please relate an experience of someone being abducted? How they're approached, where they're taken, what happens?
Okay. The experiences I've read of and the people that I have regressed, because remember I have regressed over 3,000 people in the last 16 years on a one-to-one basis. Only a very few of those are people who have had abduction experiences. But in some of those cases, there was missing time. The person was driving somewhere. They arrived there. They thought maybe they saw a bright light or something. The next thing, they're home. They feel confused, disoriented, and they have taken many more hours to get there than they should have taken. They don't remember anything. Sometimes, as in the Betty and Barney Hill case in New Hampshire, they will later have psychological problems, or in Barney Hill's case, he had an ulcer. And they will go to a doctor and they will finally end up being regressed by someone under hypnosis. And they will recover the memory of these events. Being beamed aboard, a craft comes down, hovers over their car or their home. They are lifted up on a beam, which is like a levitation type beam. They are taken into a craft. They are given a physical examination by a group of these little greys who appear to have no understanding of human emotion, as in Betty's case, and I spent some time with Betty some years ago back in New Hampshire talking with her. She said they had no understanding that she was frightened. They did this pregnancy test on her, which at that time was unknown on this planet, which later was established as a pregnancy test. They stuck this big needle into her and she was in pain, and they were surprised. They put their hand, the alien put its hand on her head and the pain stopped. And the examination is concluded and the person finds himself back in the car again. Mostly memory of it at a conscious level is wiped out. That's a typical kind of experience.
Okay, there's some people that have had their hands up for a long time, so I'm going to try to get around the edges here. Bo?
With the so-called agreement that you were talking about, from what I understand, that was 40 years ago. Would they still be doing these experiments and things like that right now?
According
It's been 40
to
years.
according to all the psychiatrists who are recently at this conference in Kansas a year ago, conferring with other associate psychiatrists all over the planet, there are cases popping up of lost time abductions all over the place. And they cannot understand what's going on. They can only report that these correlate one with another as to details, with different psychiatrists who previously have had no contact with each other. So yes, are they still going on? And according to Cooper, this alien base still exists under the sands. In fact, he believes there are several bases under New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona.
Over here?
If we assume that we all believe that we have been contacted by aliens and that they are out there, what possible reason could they have for contacting us? We possess nothing of value that they would want. Technologically, we're behind them. Probably in knowledge of the universe, we're far behind them. What possible interest could they have in us that we could give back to them in return for information?
You're asking, what do they want? That's a typical Earthman question. What do they want? It may not be what do they want, it may be what they want to give. The space beings of the confederations of light look on us in a sense as we would an older brother looking to a younger brother or sister. They are concerned, as the Pleiadians are, about evolving life down here in terms of assisting. What do we have that they want? Probably, as you said, very little. But they do wish to assist. This is the space commands of light. The Greys are here because they want something. They want to do genetic engineering. They want to restore the virility of a race that apparently is dying.
Yes, sir.
From what I've researched, their planet or atmosphere where they're from is dissipating or dying. And the reason they're interested in this area is a water resource in the galactic area. It's these abductees for crossbreeding due to their atmospheric difference to find a compatible genetic suitability.
Yes, this is the Greys we're talking of now. This does not apply to the space confederations of light, who are interdimensional beings and have no need for genetic interbreeding or genetic experimentation or engineering.
Is their planet dying, though? Is that why they're coming here? Because they need the water? What I've also heard, their vehicles are powered by an H2O principle.
This is, yes, probably one particular group. Remember, there are, as I said to Americanese, there are the good guys and the bad guys. But there are, according to the Pleiadians, according to Semyazi, the commander of the Pleiadian spacecraft that you will see about the contact in the movie this afternoon, is it in this room? Yeah, in this room at 2, you will see that they speak of hundreds of different civilizations coming from many areas in space to this planet. Some are coming purely as observers. They regard this as an experimental station. They're going to see how humanity makes it. A lot of them don't feel we are going to make it, which is a sobering thought.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned briefly this morning about the, I think the spacecraft that had a flag on the side from the trilaterals. Has that got anything to do with the Trilateral Commission that we know here on Earth?
According to Cooper, I think yes, but I shouldn't really speak for Cooper, but the trilateral insignia was seen on the uniform of certain of those Greys that were orbiting the equator and made the treaty with Eisenhower at the base in California.
Yes, sir, Roger.
Yeah, was it about 6 months ago, didn't a small country, Belgium, I think it was, report that their government went out and said that there were UFOs?
Oh yes, the Belgian sightings. Actually, it's now 2 years ago, 18 months at least, because I was in Vermont when those reports came out, and it was on Unsolved Mysteries. You probably saw it. There were sightings of triangular-shaped objects over Belgium. And again, there was the usual ridicule attempt, and because a group called the Walloons had seen them, and the Walloons apparently are subject to ridicule there, they said, oh, well, these people saw them. Of course, you know, there's nothing to it. Then some of their policemen started seeing them, and they were coming and going for a period of time, and they were seen by thousands of people, and there was no question but that they were valid. Yes, this did occur.
Yeah, I was wondering, earlier you stated about the men in black.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. I'm not familiar with that terminology.
I'm really not terribly keen in going into this whole murky thing of the men in black, but according to researchers in the early days of UFOs in the late 40s, a researcher by the name of George Hunt Williamson wrote a book called The Men in Black, or some, no, wait a minute, that was Clark. I think there was one written by the other man I mentioned, though, on the cover-up. The men in black were men, usually 3 of them, in black, all in black suits, black ties, black everything. Black glasses, dark glasses, who showed up in the early days of UFOs in the late 40s and through the 50s and even into the 60s, silencing UFO researchers. They would appear out of nowhere in what appeared to be a government-type car. They would appear to be very authoritative, and they would state, you cannot use these pictures. They would take the photographs that people had, they would silence them, they would terrify them. Later, when the people who had the experience contacted their local Air Force base or their state trooper or something, nobody knew anything about these guys. So nobody knew where these men in black came from, and to this day, nobody really does know where they're coming from. I suspect they're from off the planet.
I don't know if it got into the papers down here or not, but it was either 3 or 4 years ago, something crashed in the mountains just east of Clarkport. A lot of people saw it. I just had to think about it. It was a fiery ball. They thought at first it might be an aircraft or something crashing. And it came down, it crossed the sky from south of Sandpoint in a northeasterly direction and landed in the mountains about 20 miles northeast of Clarkport. And it went down there. And they sent aircraft to the area, they sent rescue choppers, they sent in foot troops. The area that it supposedly went down was really remote. Never found a thing.
And it definitely wasn't an asteroid then, which would seem the most obvious.
It was a very, very large fiery ball, and people report hearing it go whoosh as it went overhead. And I just had to think about it. I forgot all about it until just now.
Does anybody else know about that?
Yes, that's the same. That's the very same area the military's been watching where the bus driving ladies seen the activity. They've sat up there on the mountain for almost 2.5 years taking pictures. They pulled out in late February.
Well, then it's possible we have a crashed UFO or we have a secret base down there for UFOs.
I'd like to invite the panel members once again to respond. We haven't heard from you in a while, so I noticed, Fran, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I have so many questions. I hope I can ask two, or ask a question and then make an observation. One thing I was interested in, you said you had done over 3,000 regressions, and that got me thinking about how you got to this point. What is your background? How did you get interested in this? How did you develop your expertise and so on?
My background is that I studied for a career as a singer and poet and was into artistic things growing up, but I was also researching these subjects and in metaphysics from 15, 16 on. When I came to the States, I took courses in Santa Barbara and finally got a Doctor of Spiritual Science religious degree in this field, which is a totally authentic degree in the field of metaphysics. And in the course of all those studies, I was working with the idea of regression. I also, however, discovered within myself, which is where most of my answers have come from, that I had the ability to regress people in a reverie state, not a deep hypnosis state, and that I was getting results with 95% of the people I was working with at that time on an experimental, non-paying basis. And after that, in '75, I was impressed from my contacts to start working assisting people in clearing energy blocks so that they could spiritually advance for the time of crisis that lay ahead.
Thank you. The other observation I had is that I'm quite certain that there are some people in this group who, I mean, I can tell there are some who have had these kind of experiences and so on, some who have not. And as I listen to all these facts and statistics myself, I have this, and I don't mean this in any sense of disrespect because I teach critical thinking, and one of the things I try to tell my students repeatedly is that our assumptions sometimes build little boxes around our vision or our view, and that if we assume that there absolutely is no such thing, then we may be keeping a lot of information out of here that is important and critical. On the other hand, and as I said, I don't mean this in any disrespect, I have just this urge to kind of giggle or something, and I'm wondering if other people feel that way. I mean, it's so outside of my realm of thinking or how I have been trained to think, you know, through all of my educational experience. And I'm just wondering if other people are having that sort of uncomfortable, out of my comfort zone feeling.
Yes, but isn't that part of the little box that everybody's been, at least most everybody, I know a lot of people in this room haven't had those little boxes built around them, and I didn't. Isn't that part of the little box that people grow up with in their training to think in certain ways religiously, politically? I mean, if their parents were conservatives, they're conservatives. If their parents were liberals, they become liberals. If they were brought up in a certain religion, they tend to follow until they start thinking for themselves. I think the whole idea that life exists outside of this planet is a 20th century concept, yet it seems that there were sightings, there were experiences back in Roman times, there were experiences in the 1800s, there were experiences that go back thousands of years. It's merely a matter of, as you said, where you're coming from and whether you can push out the walls of your box.
Could we see a show of hands? I wanted to see the audience's response to that. Francis, how many of you are feeling slightly uncomfortable with this, pushing you just a little bit? Could we see a show of hands? Those people? That's okay. How many of you in this audience are real open to this information?
The majority.
Good. Duke, I'd like to have you just give us some of your observations from this morning.
I'm wondering if you're familiar with the Urantia book.
I have run into the Urantia book, but I found it very complex and I never waded right through it.
I was just curious if you made a connection because although I'm not personally familiar with it, I know enough that it was a revealing of extraterrestrials or something about the past and the present and the future of the Earth. And was this connected to UFOs? I guess that's my question.
I believe that they have made some mention in there of other terrestrial civilizations. But as I say, I have never really waded through the book, so I really couldn't comment on it too clearly.
The Urantia book. I think there are these 3 groups in this area that meet to study this book, which is 2,200 pages, something like that, big, thick, hardbound book. Urantia, Urantia, and it was supposedly it was dictated by extraterrestrials to Earth people, and has not only the history of Earth, but sort of the presence and the future of where Earth is going as well. If you're into James Michener and other large books, you might be interested.
Actually, if you look into ancient Vedic literature, it speaks of Vimanas, which was their name for flying craft, which engaged in warfare in the ancient literature of those times in India. And you will find in Tibetan literature, there are also reports. In many cultures, if you go far back enough, you will find reports of things that very definitely are what we are now calling UFOs.
Ezekiel and his wheel?
Definitely Ezekiel and his wheel.
I was just going to bring up about the Ezekiel.
If any of you cares to read your Bible, in the chapter Ezekiel, he saw the whale in the sky, and there were celestial beings, and there were, they describe a spaceship, landing pods, someone with a helmet. It's all there in that terminology of the time. You have to be able to be open enough to translate.
Realize that whatever the culture was, it was going to look at these things in the sky and describe it as being like the Romans said, well, it was a burning shield that crossed the sky. What were they used to? They were used to the sun shining on shields, on armor.
They said flying shield, they didn't even say burning.
There were other cases, you know, where they've been described, as the lady said, Ezekiel's wheel. Angels ascending and descending. Were they angels, or were they supposed to be angels? Were they coming up and down a levitation beam? You know, there are so many things. There's one point I didn't make this morning, and it's very brief, and I want you to think about it. It's simply this: the science fiction, like of Jules Verne of the 1800s, is the fact of today. What you look at today as science fiction, Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Beam Me Down, Scotty, is the fact of tomorrow.
I was going to ask you a question about when you were speaking about abduction. Often I hear it happen like to female. I've never heard anything about male abduction with like UFOs. Do you know?
You've only heard about female abductions? Oh yes, there were some male abductions. One I think we knew of that was fairly famous was down in Brazil. And in these cases, again, there was, take the Whitley Strieber case. Surely you must all know the Whitley Strieber case. It's the most publicized. I was on a program in Baltimore with Whitley Strieber on the Richard Scher Show in the spring of '87, probably just 4 or 5 years ago now. And that is the most widely publicized, where he was indeed abducted, was absolutely terrorized and psychologically, as far as I could see, disoriented even then. Later on that TV show, he seemed very psychologically unstable to me. And he did have something attached to his reproductive organs, and sperm was removed. So there are cases, definitely, and males have been taken aboard ship on a few occasions and seduced and their sperm used.
Well, I've never been lucky enough to have my own personal sighting, but I do believe that UFOs exist. IFOs, as you informed me that they are. I do believe our government hides things from us, so the things that you've revealed here and some of the audience has revealed doesn't surprise me. I wonder if the film strip from the news broadcast still exists. That's a question that I had, or if that was destroyed from Southern England.
I don't know, because it was on ITV. It wasn't a picture, but it interrupted the newscast being given by Ivor Mills. I do have a copy of the entire report, and I can Xerox it for anyone. I don't know. I do know that something else that was mentioned on Unsolved Mysteries, dealing with a book called Alternative 3, which some of you I see nodding your heads know about, that strip, that film does still exist, which was on a documentary program, and it spoke of the third alternative. This was back in like 79, 80, or 81. And there was a big furor, and the film people were made to disclaim the film as not a documentary, but it was only on a documentary program. And it had to do with the brain drain of scientists who were disappearing, and the third alternative coming up, that the few elite on this planet were planning in view of the planet dying. Their statement back then was, due to the decreasing oxygen, the holes in the ozone layer, which we now know are getting really, really dangerous, particularly in the news that came out in Time magazine on February 17th, that they were concerned back then with the fact that we might have a dying planet on our hands, and Alternative 3 was their alternative as to who could be taken off, a very limited few, and where they were going. That film film was made to be disclaimed, but the people who had organized it had shown it. But I believe that that film does still exist, because I was told recently by one audience, wherever I was, that there is a copy of that available. So everybody should be trying to get copies of Alternative 3.
Give you a question for the future. When would you might predict that there will be multiple contacts for the majority of the people instead of just the few?
When will there be multiple contacts? As soon as we get into major crisis. As soon as we are in major crisis, either geologically, which is coming up with a lot of the fault lines, particularly the San Andreas down the west coast, about to go in a major way in this next few years, with major magnitude 8 or 9 point earthquakes. That is one scenario. The possible collision of an asteroid in the Pacific Ocean is another scenario. The breakdown of Earth's governmental systems, which we see at the moment happening in communist countries, don't think it might not happen here in capitalist countries. If any of these things happen, or if any or all or several of them happen, as we get through the 90s into 2000, I would suspect by then we will have major mass contact from the space commands of light and assistance. It would help if you all sort of opened up your minds as much as you can and send out an appeal for assistance and the thought that you are friendly and that you are asking for help from your elder brothers and sisters on other planetary levels.
I don't really have another question, but on the lighter side, I feel if they're so advanced, I'd have you welcome UFO on my roof. Maybe they'll help me lose some weight here.
Yes, Super.
Are you familiar with a purported event in New Mexico in which a flying saucer crashed and there were these small bodies, and just before Christmas, I saw something on television. It was part of a documentary.
The Roswell incident?
The who?
The Roswell, New Mexico incident.
Yes.
Oh yes, that is the most famous of all. They keep rehashing it and rehashing it. It occurred in '47. The UFO from the graves did indeed crash. Small alien bodies were picked up. The Air Force scooped everything up. And on the documentary movie, UFOs Are Real, the man who was there at the time was interviewed, and it was shown very clearly that General Ramey was flown out there from the Air Force and told to tell everyone it was a crashed weather balloon. And there was an immediate cover-up. Every trace of the aliens, I believe 2 of whom were alive at the time it crashed, were taken again to Washington, D.C. in sealed containers, and they believed that one of the aliens was alive for some time afterwards. That is the most famous of all the incidents at Roswell, New Mexico. But that's old hat now.
Yes, but what I was going to say was, just before Christmas, there was a man who was retired from the military. I think he was a captain somebody or another, who was still maintaining that in fact he was there at the time and that it did happen. So the whole thing hasn't been completely covered up. I don't know how many people are listening to one guy
Was
walking
that
around.
by any chance William Cooper? He was retired from the Navy.
Yeah, no, this guy was either in the Army, Air Force, or the Army at the time.
Well, the son of one of the men who examined the hieroglyphs on the pieces of metal, and the metal could not, whatever the stuff was, it could not be bent, it could not be stomped on, they hit it with heavy objects, they could not in any way make a dent in it, and it had hieroglyphs all over it. The man that examined that, who was in the Air Force, I think has since died. His son is talking about that, and it may have been his son that you saw on television.
Nope, showed a picture of him standing at the site and he pointed, "That's me."
Well, then maybe the son was showing the movie of his father, because I know I saw something recently about that.
No, this man was there at the cleanup site and retired out of the military at fairly high rank now. He was one of the cleanup crew that was there at the time, And they did have the son of the farmer that found the Roswell.
Brazil.
That's the film, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much
Yes.
for clarifying that.
And those occupants were reportedly taken to Edwards Air Force Base also.
Okay. Thank you.
If you're referring to natural disasters or whatever they are, like the San Andreas Fault going down and the water coming up clear to Spokane and so forth, and that's when we're going to have these multiple sightings and forth things. What I'm curious about is, since they're so worried about this nuclear proliferation and this sort of thing, why didn't they come around and, warn us ahead of time? Say, don't put this nuclear stuff in.
They did.
But they did. When the Space Commands of the Confederation, when they warned them down there in Southern California not to have anything to do with the graves, they did warn about nuclear experimentation. All my earlier telethought communications, and I've got them, loads of books full of them, at that time when I was living in Santa Barbara, dealt with the danger of underground nuclear explosions and the fact it would accelerate the unbalance of the fault lines, particularly the San Andreas. They're still doing experimentation underground from time to time in Nevada, east of the San Andreas fault line.
Since the treaty with the Greys, is that why our technology has gone fast so quickly?
It could well be. It could well be. It's a heavy price to pay when you think of the number of people who've been abducted, though, against their will.
Look at the leaps in our technology since Roswell. You couldn't put a computer in this room at one time, and you can carry one in your pocket now.
That's a good point.
I have a question. You say, I watched a mystery movie on TV at one time, and they had a woman, her son, and her mother, and they saw the spaceship, and they were highly exposed to radiation, and therefore they were losing the mother's dying. Now, I don't understand how some people can be affected derogatorily, and other people, like Fran, can be not affected. Is that?
There have been quite a few cases of people whose skin has turned red, who have had almost blindness for several days, have had trouble with their vision, have had burns connected with negative space intelligence encounters. Again, remember that this is the Greys and their technology. They don't give a damn about human beings. If they want to come down and the radiation field is on, because Dr. Fry, who was contacted by ALAN, a space being from the Confederations of Light, back in the 50s at White Sands Proving Grounds, as he was down there and the craft landed and he went towards the craft, a voice came out through the intercom and it said, "Stay away from the hull, it's hot." They used the same terminology as he would understand. And they explained that until that field was turned off of the magnetic force field around the craft, it could cause burns. So the Greys, using their technology, as I said, don't give a damn about humans. People who have got caught up in this or exposed to this definitely have suffered from burns. And I remember the case of the woman and the daughter.
Other questions? Yes. I just had one. I was wondering why no one had asked about the Nazca lines in Peru and how that might relate to the UFO.
That's a good question. The lady asked about the Nazca lines in Peru. Are most of you familiar with those? They are lines that can only be seen clearly, the configurations from the air. Now, supposedly we only entered the age of aviation in this century, or did we? Long, long, long ago, in prehistory, times that you know nothing about because they no longer exist in historical records, space beings came and went from this planet. And the Nazca lines probably do relate to certain landing areas and tracks there high up in Peru where there were comings and goings from space. If any of you read one of Shirley MacLaine's books and her experience down there when she went down to Peru to make contact with a friend of hers to certain of the Pleiadians, which again correlated with the Billy Meyer case, they stated down there that in the high villages in the Andes, that the villagers were accustomed to the comings and goings of space people. Now, right now, in this period of time, they think nothing of it. They just know that they're there and that they come and they go. But see, they're not highly technologically, scientifically advanced. They're simple, honest people that know what they see and they see what they know, and it's happening. So they just accept it.
One of the people asked about why they're down here, what are they looking for? I think it relates just to the same manner that we would explore our past and do an archaeological dig. Those people that were unearthing, or those animals that are thousands of years old, don't give us anything, but it's something we're interested in. Perhaps what's happening to us might have happened to other cultures in their past. I think there's probably 1,000 reasons why they might be interested in what we're doing.
They did actually give some contactees that answer. They said that your present was our past at one time, but we learned. We one time destroyed our civilization. Once. Unfortunately, on this planet. We go back and forth to the caves apparently several times, because I remember Dr. Dan Fry telling me that they had found glass which was fused in, I believe, the Sahara Desert, which after the atomic explosions they realized could only have been fused by atomic type explosions. So things have happened way back hundreds of thousands of years ago on this planet that was similar. Man has gone back to the caves, has crawled out again, and advanced, has found nuclear energy, and is about to blast himself back to the caves again. But on those other planets, they had one bad experience, and they learned from it, and they moved onwards.
Well, I recently came across these 3 pieces of literature, and I haven't had time to read them. I would just like to ask if anybody is familiar with this book, The Watchers. Has anybody read it? I just got it, so I know nothing about it. The other one was the UFO abductions. Anybody know anything about this?
Yeah, that's a regular bi-monthly publication.
You're familiar with it?
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
About abduction?
Yeah, I mean about this publication.
Oh, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Very good. Good review of books. A lot of times they don't seem to know what's happening currently, it seems, but they get it in there.
Also, I think they tend to feature, again, negative space intelligences get the best press.
And then there's a third one that was just brought to my attention. Conspiracies, cover-ups, and crimes, political manipulation and mind control in America. Is anybody familiar with this one?
That one I haven't seen, but I want to get it. So did you leave me a note on that?
I will.
Thank you.
Is the Watchers and Elizabeth Fairclough?
I beg your pardon?
Is the Watchers and Elizabeth Fairclough publication?
Well, it's by Whitley Strieber and Raymond Fowler. I haven't read it, I just barely got it.
It's actually by Fowler. I think Strieber has a foreword or something in there, but it's the third in the series of Fowler's experiences with this woman who was abducted. It's a very interesting book.
Yes.
Hi, thank you. Hi. Earlier you were saying about this author that wrote a book on Men in Black. Was his name Clark?
I'm trying to think. It was, no, I think the one who wrote the first book on the Men in Black was Gray Barker. I'm pretty sure that it was Gray Barker. And then there was another one, UFO International, or Cover-Up or something, by George Hunt Williamson.
Thank you very much.
Okay, one final question over here. We're just about ready to wrap up.
Well, I got an observation and a question. The observation being is you've got a big cookie jar sitting there and you tell this kid, don't open that, it's got cookies in it and that'll rot your teeth. So don't do that. What's the first thing the kid's gonna do? Get the cookie jar. That pretty well analyzes how our scientists feel when you say don't mess with nuclear energy, because in long run, it's gonna blow you up. But they're gonna check it out to make sure because they don't believe anything. And the other question is, there's, in the desert of the Southwest, there is a valley, I think it's in New Mexico, I can't remember the name of the valley, where the rocks are moving. And nobody has been able to figure out how. and some of them will move a few inches, some will move a few feet, and some have been known to move as far as a quarter mile. And they've had what they call rock watchers, and they sit up on the canyon walls with infrared binoculars, and they watch these, and they cannot figure out how these rocks are moving.
Well, the same as the crop circles. They appear overnight in fields which are being watched by people and infrared cameras, but they appear nonetheless.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard about that. I'd like some data on that. That sounds intriguing.
It's one of the deserts in Southwest. I can't remember the name of what state.
Okay, could I just say one thing? I guess we're about to the end of the panel. I have to go with Tony Stewart for a TV interview. It's been great being here. The movie that I brought with me is going to be available. It's a 90-minute movie, so it's going to run till 4 o'clock. Contact. I still do have, I think, a couple of vacant regression consultations at the hotel where I'm staying tomorrow. If you want to get in touch with me, one's at 9 o'clock and one's